In this lesson, you will learn how to create and specify instances in the test case design section of Tricentis Tosca. Now that we have covered attributes, which are the different features or characteristics of the application we are testing, we need to define the variations of those attributes. In Tosca, these are called instances. Instances can be added to a particular attribute by selecting the option to add an instance from the ribbon, choosing Add Instance from the mini toolbar, or by using the shortcut Ctrl-N, Ctrl-I. For each instance, we can define different properties which help to identify how and when a particular instance should be used and in which test case combinations. Instances cannot have subinstances. The first property we can define is the character of the instance. The character property tells us what kind of instance we are dealing with: valid, invalid, or straight through. Valid is the default character value and is a white instance icon with an eye inside and is outlined in red. A valid instance means that when this value is applied, we do not expect an error to occur in the process. An invalid instance is the same color as a valid instance, but has an X instead of an I. An invalid instance indicates data that, when applied, should result in an error. This does not mean a failed test case, but rather that we expect an error or error message in the system. A simple example would be a test case which is meant to check the login process of an application. An invalid test case would use invalid data, in this case an invalid password, and should verify that the user is not logged in and that the appropriate error message appears. A straight-through is a special instance which can be defined according to certain criteria. It should be a high-risk instance, easy to implement, and have the fewest dependencies, meaning it can be combined with as many instances from other attributes as possible. This can often be referred to as the happy path value and is usually part of the smoke test. Defining which character to use for an instance is simple. You can either right-click on the instance and select Toggle Character, once for invalid and twice for straight through, or use the shortcut F7. The second property we can define is the position of the instance. This means whether the value is an inner value or a boundary value. Boundaries are the values at the end of a particular range. So I may have a range, age for example, which should only have values between and including 1 and 99. That means that the values around 1 and around 99 need to be tested because incorrect operators may have been set at the boundaries. For example, the code may say greater than 1 rather than greater or equals 1. So we could test 0 and 1 as lower boundaries, and 99 and 100 as upper boundaries. Boundary values are important to consider as they constitute a high probability of error, and this therefore needs to be tested. These are one-time errors as long as the range on either side of the boundaries do not change from one release to the next. Therefore, boundary values are often used in one-time tests. Defining whether an instance is a boundary value can be done by pressing F8 or selecting Toggle Position from the context menu. Inner values are the default and look like normal instances. Boundary values have small dashes around the eye in the instance icon. They can be either valid or invalid. Inner values are all other values within the range that do not fall immediately around the boundaries. In other words, all numbers between and including 2 to 98. Do we need to test each of these individually? Probably not. Also remember, one of the goals of test case design is to maximize risk coverage with the least number of test cases. We can instead group these numbers into an equivalence class. This would mean we would create one instance which represents all numbers between 2 and 98 and include this instance in our regression tests. It is not necessary to group values into equivalence classes for all attributes, of course. If you have an attribute with specific values, not ranges, then you can define the specific values to be used.